Hello, friends. Welcome back to another episode of Building at the Edges, a podcast from C Club. I'm your host, Jess, or that tall guy on the internet. Before we get into today's episode, I need to remind you that applications for C Club's 6th cohort close on May 15th. That's Monday, May 15th. If you are thinking about applying to the Consumer Crypto Accelerator, please make sure you get your application in before close of day. I think it's midnight Pacific time, but don't hold me to it. We're taking a big swing at the consumer crypto space. We see a huge opportunity to back innovative builders and products there. If you are building something like that, we want to hear from you. If you want to learn more, visit cclub.xyz. We also have an open mint there for you who want to follow along and signify this moment in time with us. We're going to do some fun things with that as well. So cclub.xyz, would love to see your application in there. Today's conversation is with Robin from BasedAF. Robin is also known as SuperMassive on the internet. He's been a video creator and a filmmaker. His work has been probably most prominently featured on The Defiant over the last couple years, maybe most prominently in crypto. So you've probably seen some of his stuff, but he's up to something new. And we discuss the intersection of storytelling and tech. Robin tells us about his experience as a filmmaker over the last 20 years and how the advancement of technology has impacted his career. No shock, we get into a bit of an AI diatribe here. We talk about the implications and the inevitability of the metaverse, or what Robin describes as the internet built by game developers. He also walks us through everything he's working on at BasedAF, including the groundbreaking way he's utilizing Unreal Engine and some new technology, hardware, etc., to create instant motion capture. His holodeck, he calls it, which is very fun. I also dive deep into his unique takes on co-creation, storytelling, and the Web3 or crypto industry at large. I think Robin's going to build something really amazing, and we get to have an early look into it and the thinking behind it. So let's jump into it. How you doing?
I'm good. Another day of burning through testing and trying stuff out, and you
live for that shit, though, don't you?
Honestly, I hate testing. I hate testing prod because there is no testing prod. It's just prod for us. So I want to get to the prod, so that it's like we have to build a camera before we can use the camera. And you sort of learn these weird things, and none of it's really the thing that you're going to make. So it's much better to just have a project and build that. But we still have so many things to figure out.
I mean, every time I talk to you, you're inventing, you're building. This is like so core to, like, okay, either you are just do not realize that you have control over your future and you can go put your time and effort wherever you want and you can put it somewhere else, or you seem to really love the act of creation and invention. And
I do. I think it's also that I've had to let go of the idea that I am a filmmaker. I think that's probably the thing, because there's a sort of traditional trajectory for filmmakers, and that is rapidly being eroded. Like you hear Hollywood stalwarts bemoaning the way the industry has gone, and it's like that career is sort of dead. Shooting commercials now, like it used to be that you'd work your way up through music videos and then you get into commercials. You'd be rep by a commercials agency, and there's really good money to be made there. You could be making enough on 2 commercials in a year to keep you very happily sustained through an entire year, which means you can spend the rest of your time going to movies and hanging out and talking about stuff and creating
making your art film.
Or making your art film or whatever it is you want to do. But it's just all gone away because the highly creative work that used to come out of ads just doesn't work anymore, and no one really wants it except for like a big thing for Christmas or whatever. So it gets harder and harder to make the thing that you really want to make, and the agencies have less and less power these days because it's less easy to kind of measure the effectiveness of what they do. And so for me, just letting go of the idea of being a filmmaker and leaning into the idea of being some form of storyteller, that wherever I decide to exercise the thing that keeps me engaged, that would be the thing. And like primarily I use film and timeline-based media as my platform. But I was trying to explain to a VC just before this call, like what it is that we do and how it would make money. And he was saying, well, all the content that I make is designed to be commentary. It's designed to create an impression on Twitter, and we measure it that way. And like all the content I create is designed to keep me motivated to come back the next day and do it again because it's really hard. Which sounds upside down. I hate the clout chasing thing. I just can't do it. Like I've tried writing Twitter threads and being a thread guy. I hate it. Because it's like, you know what? I'm just going to get GPT-4 to write this for me. And then GPT-4 spits out a thing and you're like, oh, this sounds exactly like what someone who was just trying to start doing this would write. It doesn't sound like me. It's like, why would I bother doing that? I hate it.
I've been trying to train it to do better Twitter threads because I just like, there's so many things that I would want to put out into the world. And I just like, oh, okay, how do I, and it's just, I'm hoping that maybe I can teach it well enough. But then at the same point, as YouTube and social media starts to disrupt the film game or the creator, the artistry game, and then most recently, I know AI has been front of mind for you, that there's sort of been this like constant exploration or chasing or understanding where solid ground might live, either both for you personally as a creator, but also I think more generally in the business or the art form or the creative form that you participate in. Have you sort of ended up in a place where you feel like you're on solid ground there? Or are we just going to be in this world where we're just constantly needing to evolve our understanding of what it is that we actually do?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I don't think there is such a thing as solid ground, and I don't think I necessarily like solid ground. I think if I'm on solid ground, then no, that's not true. I heard myself say it and I realized it's not true. I do like solid ground because solid ground is a place to escape to. It's a refuge. It's a place from which to form strength. And I think where I am at the moment is nothing is solid. That's been a real thing for the last 2 months. The skills I've acquired over the course of the last 20 years have been traditionally very defensible. They've been quietly eroded and now more rapidly eroded as things have gotten progressively more high tech. But being a director used to be a thing which was very, very difficult to get into. And it was very straightforward once you got your foot in the door to maintain a career in that space. But now everyone has a phone and everyone is a director. And I think that's great. It's the same with Photoshop and designing and all these things. Everything's been kind of rendered down slowly. And one of the things that was always a fallback skill for me was editing. So the way I edit, and you can ask the team here, you talk about your 10,000 hours. I have 100,000, maybe 200,000 hours of editing, of just sifting through garbage, looking for gems. Particularly when in the early days of this, like the camera I'm shooting on right now is gorgeous. It's very affordable. You can stick this Zeiss Distagon 40mm lens on and you'll get a really nice result. When I started, you couldn't. So you had to be extremely skillful packaging material, telling a good story, despite the shortcomings of the material you were working with. Those skills, they stay with you and they're worth something because I can sit in and edit any type of material and I know how to fix it. So if a director's telling me I've got a problem with this shot or I don't understand how to go from here to here, you can go, what if you took this piece, flipped it around, and then we just added this bit here? You become very resourceful. What you see now, YouTubers exist in exactly the same space. They have no material because they didn't shoot it or they didn't think to shoot it or they don't have time to shoot it. So they become incredibly resourceful at finding these really creative ways of telling a story because they had limited resources, which I love. What you're seeing now is there is this bounty of tools that can allow you to do absolutely anything you want. And we get to this point of the templatization of culture, which is everything is a filter that you can add on or a template that you can buy off the shelf and get instant results that are comparable with anyone with a half decent aesthetic or competence in the skill that you're looking to lean on. And that means that everything is basically just decent, okay. So everything that's not just decent, okay, is fighting for space with stuff that presents as if it's decent. And AI only accelerates that. So it's a really, really tough thing to stare at all of those previously defensible positions and think, what do we have that is defensible? What is it that breathes life and meaning into the occupation of being someone who creates for a living? I hesitate to call myself a creator because I think there's an image in people's minds of what that is and what the job is. And I very much don't want to become that. But at the same time, I can't help it being the thing that I actually am. But I think I'm still trying to find the version of it that I feel the most comfortable with. Because even like the tropes of being a content creator, hey guys, like, subscribe, it helps the algorithm, all these little things that you're supposed to do, the calls to action, the things that are supposed to optimize your channel, improve retention. I reject them out of hand because I hate them. I hate that kind of content. And you just kind of hope that there is a space for the kind of content that doesn't have to do that. But the only way that's going to happen is if you just keep grinding it out and keep putting it out week after week, month after month. And so I think the challenge is then to find the thing that you are happy to do the grinding for. And I did grind in my previous job at the Defiant. And for most of that time there, I was very content with exploring that and understanding that. And then I got to a point where I just was completely done with it. And that's not necessarily because the job sucked. It's because the industry we were covering sucked. It just, there was so much progress and so much excitement around it. when we first started covering it, which then just defaulted to a place where there were no new ideas.
Yeah.
And it was just like, well, here's a decentralized exchange, but now it's on Avalanche. So let's get excited.
That's the thing I see you doing. I see you chasing new ideas. I mean, I feel like the flight to safety or to solid ground is, in this world where everything is just meh, being exceptional is still an incredible standout thing, right? I think you still have the opportunities to stand out for the crowd, maybe even more so. And that's like the consistent thing I see in you, whether that's when we first chatted, probably over 2 years now, whether it was what you're doing at the Defiant, it was a very different video than you covered, yes, a boring industry, exciting industry, then boring industry, but in a way that really brought a whole new, like nobody was doing it like you guys. And then when I saw you launched an NFT collection after having been the most critical human being on NFTs, so I would call you a skeptic. That's a very good thing, right? I think that you're somebody who very clearly resists the pull to sort of fall into the tropes or into the standard narratives. I think that's what makes you really good at your job, at being able to sort of find the edges of stories and tell things in an interesting and new way. But yeah, I would very much say, in the same way that I think you just called DeFi boring and the idea of liking and subscribing, there was sort of just this like rote copying that I think was pervasive in the industry. That I don't know if we had an exact conversation about that, but I would very, very much put you in a skeptic bucket. Again, still working in the space, so there's like a gradient of skepticism out there. But it was I was like, SuperMassive, Robin, BasedAF, NFTs. What the heck is going on here? That's what I would like to switch to, because I wanted this conversation. We can go like a dozen different directions, but there are two sort of big narratives that I think came out over the last little while that I think deserve a degree of skepticism and also have, I believe, still like a ton of opportunity and optimism and excitement in them. And I would call that NFTs generally and the Metaverse. And as far as I know, you are probably the best person to talk about sort of the creative touch up against those two things.
Yeah, well, touching on the NFT project, I did my first one in 2020, and I had a game theoretic idea that I wanted to test around the concept of ownership over time. Because what I was perturbed by at that point was people were putting these insane price tags on NFTs at the time, and other people were willing to pay those prices for something which I didn't understand the value of. And it felt very hard for me to understand what the value to anyone who bought these things was over time. So I was trying to give the ownership of an NFT a timeline that was tracked to Bitcoin. So I basically put 12 NFTs on sale, and one of them contained a Bitcoin, and you could basically look inside that NFT and discover whether it had the Bitcoin inside. So it was basically like a lottery ticket, but the idea was to see whether the 12 owners would work together to retain the collection intact, because it was worth more to them to do so than to take the risk of looking inside and breaking it. Because of course, if you could look inside and then you did have the Bitcoin, then it would render the rest of the collection pretty much worthless. So it was this idea of coordination of human beings through incentives. And of course, the value of the collection, because it was tracking the price of a Bitcoin, was volatile necessarily, but it also had a peg. So you could peg the collection to an asset that was trackable in real time, that had a day-to-day fascination and a check-in, so you could see exactly where it might be or what your piece of that was. And I thought that was really interesting. So that was the first NFT that I did. And beyond that, then I never did another one, because I just didn't see anything that kept me interested or would represent my thinking any better than that. So fast forward to where we are now, and I'm looking to launch a new kind of content studio that's focused on the metaverse. And I guess where it comes from is I'm fascinated by this idea of a second layer of existence that is digital. It's really hard to talk to people about the metaverse these days because there is so much noise around it, and there's so much pushback on what it has been sold as. I think the essential essence of what it is quite easy to talk about. So I express it as it's the internet built by game developers, which for me captures enough of it for it to be simple to express, but also doesn't tie you down in unnecessary kind of clarification that probably doesn't hold up in 5 years' time. So if I say the internet built by game developers, you can kind of understand that it's gamified, it's probably three-dimensional, it's a social experience, it's something you share with other people. And this is very much how Tim Sweeney views it. And obviously, we look at Unreal Engine, we look at Fortnite, we look at these emergent, proto-metaverses, or whatever you want to call it, even though that's a terrible name for it. You can sort of see where it's going. So I wanted to focus on that. I wanted to focus on the technology that would be building it, like the really crappy experiences you can have in so-called metaverses, whether they're crypto ones, blockchain ones or not, but to really understand the implications for humanity in all of that. Because at the end of the day, if it's inevitable, which it feels very much like it is, that some form of digital layer of existence will be layered over everything, then I want to understand that, and I want to explore it, and I want to make sure that I'm really on top of it, because I have two young humans that depend on me to understand this stuff, and they're being brought up in a world in which this is just going to be hyper-normalized at a speed we can't comprehend. So as a father, that's kind of where I'm at. The problem is it just all gets wrapped up in this NFT, metaverse, crypto, blockchain marketing hype that is spoiling the view for everything that's going on. So really for us, BasedAF is about that. It's about doing it in a way that's really entertaining and having fun with it, but it's really fundamentally, it's meeting my own paranoia about this technology head on and trying to understand where there is light at the end of the tunnel, where there is positivity, where there's hope, and doing it by experimenting and building stuff, not just by talking about it. That idea of it being early, it being a kind of wasteland of garbage and bad ideas, it being a game, all of that led me to a point where if I'm building this to build an audience and I want to have fun with that audience, then let's give that audience an identity and a role to play in a narrative world that could represent my feelings about this. So rather than build some kind of shiny cyberpunk future city, let's call it what it is. It's a wasteland. So we built this kind of very lightly sketched out world called Trashland. We have a character called Karma in there, who is a force of retribution, a punitive measure to punish us for how idiotic we've been, that brings people there and fixes ears onto their heads. And those ears allow them to parse signal from noise and hear what's going on in this wasteland. And then let's use this narrative of the wasteland to experiment. So instead of, delivering people a fully flashed out virtual world in which nothing happens, let's start small and experiment with things and use that metaphor of Trashland to higgledy-piggledy piece things together and be experimental. And that essentially is what the Baseheads are. They're a community of people that are unafraid to experiment and try things out and go into the unknown and go into the wilderness. And so in that sense, we're looking to kind of be pioneers in this space. And it will be messy and it will be weird, but everything is messy and weird. But fundamentally, there are human beings at the heart of it, tackling big questions that impact all of us as human beings. So that's basically, in a very, very large nutshell, what I'm doing. God, it got serious there. I'm never normally this serious. What have you done?
This is good.
Must be done of the day.
Well, so I want to get into, you've built so much that there's sort of this vision here, and I would consider myself, a skeptic of the traditional metaverse narrative, at least in the crypto world. I share a lot of, I think, your concerns and the hype, and I don't own any digital land. It just seems like a crazy thing to me to some degree. But
don't skate over that one, Jess. Say it like it is. It's bullshit.
It's absurd.
It's absurd.
It is. It is. It's absurd. Yes. Disclosure, I own, and I'm not, maybe, should I be short? Can you be short digital land? I would have been short digital land. But you said something about the inevitability of the metaverse. And I think that's something that a lot of people talk about glossing over. That's a thing that you truly believe, but I don't think that's held by, dare I say, the majority of human beings. So how do you square that? Like, in what world do you see the inevitability of the metaverse?
So I think where people trip up is that they think that the metaverse as it is expressed in science fiction films is how it's going to be, or what it needs to be for it to be considered a metaverse. And really, there's touching grass. You go outside, you experience a thing. For most people, their phone is in their pocket. They take their phone out, they take a photograph, and that photograph gets shared around and it becomes the experience of the event. There isn't often a moment where you don't take your phone out and take a photograph of that. There is Zoom calls, there's Roblox, there's Fortnite, there's all these digital experiences that are kind of adjacent to and layered on with, but we experience things in a very multifaceted, multi-layered way, in a connected way all the time. Where the metaverse takes us is it's wrapped up more in our everyday existence. It's wrapped up in increasingly visual components. And what I see the inevitability of it is it's this fusion of two things. It is technology and human beings. They are merging together faster and faster and faster in a way that I think is being underestimated. And I don't want to get all Ray Kurzweil on it, but like I've been fascinated with transhumanism for a very long time. And it seems to be completely inevitable that if you are thinking about AGI and the soon-to-be preeminence of artificial intelligence, it seems only logical to me that as a human species, there will be some of us that feel the only way forward is to include that in themselves, whether it's an implant, whether it's bionics, whatever. That seems to me inevitable because there is one fundamental thing driving that inclination, driving that urge, and that is mortality. So once you stare mortality in the face and understand that it can be defeated, then you are talking about a new iteration of Homo sapiens, Homo Deus, if you like, that is fused with technology. It's inevitable. I don't see a future in which that cannot be the case. So once you accept that, then the metaverse is inevitable because the internet will be inside us. So that's it. It feels difficult to think about going into a virtual world and exploring, a really crappily rendered pseudo game that's purporting to be a virtual world because it doesn't bear any relevance to kind of how we see things. But if you think about a future Apple set of goggles that allow you to overlay things into the world, and you think about like a mobile phone, right? The mobile phone is the most dumb device these days because it's so inefficient. It runs out of batteries. You've got fingerprints all over it. It's square. The world isn't square. That is going away. Whether we like it or not, the mobile phone as a device is going away because how we consume media, how we'll experience things is going to become more and more like a portable or a wearable or something that's piped directly into the brain. It's just where it's going. I may not like it. It may scare the shit out of me, but to me, it doesn't take a massive leap of imagination to get there. And so that's why I think the metaverse is inevitable. So it might be like the early foothills of whatever it ends up being and whatever it goes. But like we have a chance, at least at this point in time, to have a say in how it's created. And then like, even if you didn't believe any of that, now that you've seen GPT-4, now you've seen how proliferated AI-generated content, AI-generated search, AI-generated optimization of everything will be intrinsic to the human existence, the human experience of everything, then what's interesting about AI is that it will very quickly allow us to have a massively customized, massively personalized view of the world if we so desire. Yeah. If we so desire.
And we seem to desire that based on...
Well, that is the thing, isn't it,
yeah.
right? So if you asked people 10 years ago, would you like to have a curated feed of videos that you didn't have to think about, that were just served up to you, that just knew what you wanted? I don't think anybody would have wanted that. I don't think anybody would have said that. But now we have TikTok, and that's exactly what it does. So once you get into this feedback loop of like, oh yeah, well, just give the customer what they want. The ultimate level of customization, personalization is something where in real time, the world is presented to you as you would like it to be. And if you're, a white supremacist, and that is the view of the world you want to see, then that will be possible. Or you object to the casting of a person of color in The Little Mermaid. You'll be able to see that film with a person not of color. I mean, this is basically where it's going. The deepfakes, the AI-generated videos, everything in this highly customized, highly personalized view, because that is something that people didn't know they wanted, but now it's become a thing. This is just the end game of all of that. And so, yeah, that is the metaverse. It's a layer of technology that transforms the world and allows you to do a bunch of things that aren't possible when you're touching grass, that will just become normal. And I think what's really serves it up for me is like, I watch my kids playing Roblox and seeing how they interact with those worlds and how they curate their existence and their avatars and their identity and all these kind of things. And like, it's very facile to call Roblox the metaverse or to point to that as being like the emergent metaverse. But if you look at the behavior that's behind it, even if the platform goes away or evolves into something that's very, very different, the behavior is the thing that drives all of this. And the behavior is real. So if that behavior is there and the technology is there, then for me, it's inevitable.
I agree with you. And I mean, I think there's a whole other conversation here around the implications of that. I think what is interesting is the old idea of the frog boiling in water is just the perfect thing, I think, for technology generally, right? Like we just start to experience it. So many of these preferences are actually just not even being made explicit. They're just through behavior. They're through our actions. You can sort of be in this liminal space between maybe what our sort of future version of the metaverse is and where we are today. We're having this conversation over Zoom. Our teams are probably around the world to some degree. Most of our brands and the relationships concepts we're building are actually being built through these other platforms that are digital first. I mean, I live in the woods and I'm building an organization that has a global reach. All these things to me, I think would, at least in my mind, prove that there's an inevitability of the metaverse, or maybe we're there already. But I think what I've seen you do is actually run at that a lot faster than pretty much anybody I know. I've heard the Roblox. I love talking to my friends who have kids. There's sort of this inevitability of crypto or of digital goods. I think that sort of come from that as well. Maybe it's part of this fear or this drive to find solid ground or just a general fascination. But I know what's behind you in your studio. I know these tools and spaces and worlds that you are sort of playing with. And to me, those are probably even just more baby steps getting us into this inevitable flywheel that pulls more and more people into those digital spaces. So I'm wondering if you can, give me an overview. Take us into your world a little bit. What are these things that you are sort of the edges that you are pushing at that are driving sort of insight and understanding for you?
Well, it's a funny case of necessity is the mother of invention. The pandemic hit, right? So for me as a filmmaker, I like going to places and discovering them through the lens of a camera. That's one of my favorite things to do is like travel to another country, see that culture through my camera, because a camera opens doors for you. It starts conversations and it allows you to be alive to what's around you because it sort of sharpens your focus, literally, to use an obvious metaphor. And I love that. The problem with during the pandemic is couldn't go anywhere. And I've been working out of this same studio for nigh on 4 years now, producing all sorts of different types of content in all sorts of different ways, but it's really limiting, right? And you can get quite creative with it and everything else. So during the pandemic, I guess a couple of things came out, which is I started looking into virtual production, which is basically what they used on The Mandalorian. So they built these massive LED screens and they piped environments from Unreal Engine and, built sets. But what was fascinating about that was the backdrops blended, and you can tell if you know what you're looking for, but they responded to the camera in 3D. And more importantly, they were projecting the light onto the actors that was consistent with the worlds in which they were supposed to be. And if you've ever done green screen work, that's quite difficult to pull off. So there's a sense of immersion in there. And that was really just using a game engine to power a technology that just wasn't possible before in real time. So what you saw out of that was because Unreal was free, indie sort of filmmakers started to get their hands on it and started to build things in Unreal and started to use it as a tool for storytelling, which was fascinating because traditionally, it wasn't that. You could do cinematics in game engines. And then they started using Vive trackers and things like that to position a camera in 3D space. I thought this was fascinating because I was basically looking at this thinking, you can build anything. You can go anywhere. And as a progressively more and more conscientious human being thinking about my carbon footprint, like if I don't have to travel on a stinky plane to, for instance, Utah and be in the desert, I can build that desert for myself here and still tell a story that feels like it has that spectacle and grandeur. Then that's really fascinating, and started playing around with the tools and started using it and then realized it was really, really hard. At the same time, we had this emergence of 10K PFP collections, which gave people a sense of identity, gave them digital characters, and then you started to see 3D ones come out and you could embody these characters. And I thought, okay, well, you could take the IP of these collections, place it in that environment and start to tell stories in there that will be really fascinating. And I started playing around with it, started trying to do like live streams with it. But the thing that always stuck with me was real time. The fact that this game engine could be piped in or connected to photorealistically in real time. That really got me thinking, because traditionally, if you want to produce a piece of animated content, it's quite labor intensive, quite slow, and it takes a lot of time. So I started thinking about like, how would we use it and how would we do something different with it? And how would we use it to tell stories that fit into a YouTube schedule? Because I need things to be done fast. So that whole idea of real time stuck with me, and I went down the rabbit hole massively, looked at all these things, and it was just, I needed a team to do it. So once I knew I was going to try and do BasedAF, I made that the core proposition of what I wanted to do, which was to explore the metaverse concepts, ideas from a space which inherently, intrinsically looked like the metaverse. So rather than being a dry VC talking about the $1 trillion opportunity and writing innumerable blogs and tweets about that, build it from the inside out and experiment with these things and with these tools, because that's where the metaverse would begin. And I kind of feel like Unreal Engine is probably what you could consider the layer one of the metaverse. Like Unity is fantastic, and it's not like it will all be on Unreal, but like Unreal's like the AWS of online content or whatever. It's just going to be the de facto standard for stuff because they're pushing so hard for interoperability for marketplaces, for content creators. They saw what Roblox did and they're like, yeah, we can do that too. It's called Fortnite Creator. Go build, share in the profit. Like, it's massive. So what we're trying to do with Base is build basically a holodeck. So it's a bunch of optical motion capture cameras arranged around a room, which is just behind me over there. And what it allows me to do is jump in a mocap suit and perform a digital character in real time in photorealistic rendered environments as if I was actually there. And that's really important because making it look realistic and making it as easy as me just picking up a camera and vlogging with it is a really big magic trick. But it's also not the magic trick, because if I want to film myself with a regular camera outside, it costs me very little and it's very, very easy to do. So why would I bother trying to make a virtual environment look as good as the real world? Well, one reason, I can become anybody that I want. And the great thing about the optical motion capture studio is that the rendering of your movements is incredibly faithful. It's hard to put a value on that fidelity until you see it for yourself. If you've seen VTubers and if you've seen even just like decent animations, physical movement, human movement is incredibly hard to replicate in animation. It takes months to really finesse it. And here we have a system where it will just take the data in and capture it in real time and put it into a digital character, which means that there is no animation required. That's a big deal. What the system can also allow me to do is track a prop. So I can be holding a sword or a guitar or anything that I want. We can also have a camera that's tracked in the volume that can basically replicate the camera in Unreal Engine and act as that camera. So it can move around me and be as fluid as I am. So we have that connection to basically filming like a YouTuber. What I can also do is I can turn the game engine on. That's massive. That is massive. So solving the first thing was I need this to feel like it's shot by a TikToker or a YouTuber, someone who's just casually jumped on the street and just done something. I need it to have that immediacy and that relatability, because I think one of the problems I see with a lot of animation is it defaults to being widescreen and cinematic. And that is these days, honestly, kind of boring. We've seen it. You know, we're bombarded with so much high gloss, high production value CGI that it doesn't land anymore. TikTok, this more relatable content does, because it still has that human quality. So again, injecting as much humanity into digital as possible by taking the motion capture studio and allowing it to be imperfect. Like the camera's shaky, but it's real. It wasn't like sort of artificially shaken. It's real. And like if I fall on the ground, like the ground connects with me and I have contact shadows, all of those things, that's amazing. But the really important bit is, because this is a game engine, it's not the real world. It can do a bunch of things that the real world can't do. So if you're going to make the argument for why you wouldn't just go outside and shoot the thing, it's because it's a live engine. That means it literally is like playing God. You can do anything. Now, it's not easy, but you can. So, for instance, we have a busy street. There are people walking in that street. There are cars driving around. You can hear them. It's a live environment. I'm actually in the game. If a car hits me, it breaks. This is nuts. And it's all happening in real time. And I have a camera. Now, the camera that we built, I mean, that was a journey in itself. The camera, I had like 4 or 5 specific requests for this device because, again, I need it to be live. I need it to be as if I'm filming with a real camera. So the camera has to take the feed from the engine, pipe it to the camera wirelessly, because there's no wires, feed the camera operator the exact lens height that he's at, as if it was a real camera. We also have a normal camera on the same rig that can film the behind the scenes at the same time, because if we're showing it on Instagram, how it was shot and what was shot together is amazing. Just what was shot probably isn't so amazing for a social audience, but seeing, oh my God, they did that and then it came out like this, oh my God. And then that becomes part of social content. So that's also on the rig. Then the ability to record on the camera and then spit those rushes to anywhere in the world instantaneously. That's wild. So, you know, imagine we have a client that's somewhere overseas and they want to tap into the studio and they want to do a fast turnaround piece of content. Maybe they want to respond to Trump getting arrested and they want to have their character say that. They can pipe the character into the studio. We can spit out that piece of content. They can be editing it as we shoot. So you see all these things, we're reducing the animation pipeline down to zero. And it's not to say that animation isn't good and that animation isn't amazing and that it doesn't have a place. It's just that if you are the owner of a digital character and you want to respond to stuff in real time at a higher production value than is possible with VTubing, this is how you do it. And of course, like the interactivity, the fact that we can have more than one person in the volume at the same time and they can interact, we have full freedom to move around. Plus, we can control what's going on. So if I don't like the sun, I'll move it in the sky and I can have a tablet that allows me to do that. Or if I don't like the way a building looks, I can press a button and it will blow up. All of these things allow me to suddenly use the environment as an instrument that I can perform in real time to add more expressiveness to the way I'm feeling or the way I want to project my scene. So it's not just a guy sitting in front of a webcam. Now, it's not like that isn't valid. It's just that that's where my brain has gone. It's like I knew that this system could be possible. And as far as I know, we're the only people in the world that thought like that, like thought to use a game engine not as a piece of cinema, but as a piece of TikTok. And then to build the system that would allow us to completely bypass all the things that Unreal's actually amazing at, which is cinematic renders and all this thing, and just focus on the real-time component. And then from there, like start to tell stories that hook into the IP that we build, which is Trashland and like, but honestly, for me, it was just, if I come in the office in the morning and something's happened or somebody's done something amazing in the community, I want to be able to jump in the suit and project something from the world that we built that very moment and have it published that afternoon. That's it. It's just feeding my need to turn around high quality content fast, because like content fast, easy. High quality content at the standard I want to do it fast, it's taken a while. But we have it. And that's the wild thing. We actually built it and it actually works. And very soon we'll be able to start putting out content with using that technology. When I say it's a holodeck, it kind of is. It's not quite there yet because what I see through my eyes isn't the world. We're working on how we get there. And I think the AR goggles might get us there. It's sort of problematic because when you have face tracking, it needs to see your eyes. And if you have goggles on, they can't do that. But like another piece of this is the people I was talking about walking around the scene, they're NPCs. They don't interact with you. But we're hoping to hook up a partnership with a company that will allow us to do that. So we can inject our IP into an NPC and I'll be able to have conversations with it in real time, like completely in engine. And what's wild about that is, like, for instance, if I said to this character, listen, you're pissing me off now, do a little dance for me, the system will build the blueprint for that character to dance right then and there, and then it will dance for me. And I didn't have to do that. The AI engine will build that for me. Crazy.
Yeah, these sort of generative worlds, I think, are fascinating. You walked me around the studio virtually the last time we talked, and there's this room, and there's all these things in it, and yet it still looks like a normal room. And then there's, in the middle of that room was this camera rig type thing that had a whole bunch of boxes and things on it and doodads. And so this is real stuff that you're actually building and inventing, yes, which is super exciting. There's also clearly a ton of time, a ton of money. You know, there's a big vision that you're pushing forward here. And I'm curious how you're looking at the business opportunity here. Is this about just building new tech? Is this about a media company? Are we building IP? How are you making sense of that?
Yeah,
right
no, it is. It's definitely a media company, because my own preoccupations with where the metaverse is going and what it makes me feel, I think, are shared by other people. They just don't know how to quite give it a voice yet, whether to be skeptical about it, whether to be interested in it. So for us, understanding how we tap into that, which is 100% through Unreal Engine. It's a very mass adopted piece of technology. We have a unique perspective on it and a unique way of using it, but it allows us to tap into a bigger audience. So that the audience for the kind of content we make, we know is out there. We just have to hook it up in the right way. And unfortunately, that means probably stepping a little away from Web3 and crypto with how toxic they are, but also because they sort of lead us in a direction we don't necessarily want to go or don't necessarily need to be the champion for at this stage. So yes, very much. There's a few different revenue streams. There's very traditional ones, which is this is a route to build an audience around very unique content that we make. And given the landscape that we're in, we're pretty confident that that audience will come to us and find us. But again, it's not just one show. We have all sorts of different ways of attacking our own sort of curiosity about the metaverse. One is like just listening to everything that's out there, whether it's AI and everything else, and that can be through a podcast. There could be me just unpacking stuff, criticizing it, commenting on it. And we call that trash talk. And then we build stuff once a week. So we just hack something together really fast. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it's like, what do we challenge ourselves to build this week? Whether it's a camera rig, whether it's a game, whether it's, a fake AI tool that we built a couple of weeks ago. It's something like that, where we challenge ourselves to come up with something in a week and see whether it has any merit or not, because iterating rapidly teaches us a lot. And so all of these different touch points are this idea of like exploring what's out there, researching it, unpacking it, building something with it. And then the bottom of the stack is sharing those tools with our community, because we feel like there's going to be a lot of people who feel displaced by AI and technology, who feel almost abandoned by the people who are now using it. There will be people who don't quite know how to make sense of it and want a place to be able to rebuild some of that back. And for us, that's going to be creators. We're building a space for creators to be creative on and to use the things that we're finding to kind of carve out a little piece of trash land for themselves in whatever way that they want to do it. So it's not unique that at all, because if you look at Artifact, if you look at like a lot of different NFT projects, they provide models and they provide some tutorials and everything else. The difference with us, and there are a few projects where this is also the case, but I think this is one of our core strengths, is the difference is that we are the main like big guerrilla power creators in our own IP. So we are the ones that are the best placed to exploit it and show how it can be exploited. And what's been really interesting in the last month or so is seeing how people have taken a little piece of something that we've made and started building off of that, because that was really interesting to them. So rather than taking their asset, their base head, and turning that into a character or turning that into a thing that represented them, they took a piece of what we'd made and it worked off that. So there was this fake AI product we made called Effluence, which is effluence, which is basically another word for sewage, because it's shit. And the idea of this was that you could take any influencer and make a digital version of them that would sound like them and would deliver a marketing message for you. You could buy this thing off the shelf and it had a different name. So we built Mr. Best instead of Mr. Beast. And a couple of our community members started doing Mr. Best reacts videos to Mr. Beast videos. So this crazy meta, and they're hilarious. So that they're expressing themselves in a way that they couldn't do as themselves or even as their base head, but using this proxy of Mr. Best, they've got this new kind of love for short form, and we've given them stuff, and then we share all these other weird things that we find. But fundamentally, the idea of us building out Trashland and being like content creators that use that IP in the most maximal way that we can, it's us then allowing them to follow in behind us. And I think the thing that we noticed from like tracking a lot of different NFT projects was that like probably Pudgy Penguins of all of them used content creation and used the IP in a really effective way to create more touch points for people to discover the brand and the IP. And that sort of filtered down into the value of the collection as a whole. And really, we've just tried to follow that same playbook, just in a very different way, in a more kind of turbocharged way, where we really lean into the content, and the content should draw in eyeballs and all the different ways that people can find it, and then pull them down into a place where there's this really absurd, almost nihilistic community of people scrapping away in this IP that lets them do the thing that they want to do, that is not so very tightly controlled, because the IP is flexible enough to allow them all these different voices to thrive and have a place, rather than trying to confine them to the aesthetic or the specifics of a certain IP. Ours is very loose, and that I think that's quite helpful. And then having this vibrant example of us building and creating in real time in front of them, so that they can use that as a springboard to create their own adventures.
Yeah, it seems as if there's sort of like these moments when new technology emerges, new channels, new platforms are clearly times where we have the opportunity to build new IP, something that's like traditionally very, very challenging to do. I think that's why we saw such a hype and excitement for some of these NFT projects. The bigger ones there was the sense that
the new Disney.
Yeah,
yes.
Sure. I mean, we probably saw 1 million decks with that. We're going to build the new Disney, which
yes.
To the point where it means nothing.
I have a big issue with that. I have a big issue with that, and I think Yuga should be considered an outlier, and everyone that was trying to copy the Yuga playbook. And I mean, I've seen some of the valuations of some of these NFT projects, and you just go, "What the fuck?" Mm-hmm. Like, what the fuck? And there should be some people scratching their heads, going, "What did we do? What is the value of all of this?"
I think there are.
Like, Yuga is a massive outlier, and they have the execution risk on that investment, insane. And also, what's the upside on the Yuga investment? How long is the time frame? Like in 10 years? Wow, it's difficult. But like I saw how much Doodles raised and what their valuation was, and I don't know. I don't know where to put that. I don't know where to put that number in my brain, because I don't see how they do the fundamental thing that I think you need to do, which is create content. I don't see it. And so for me, when I'm pitching what we do, is like the thing that the only thing I can see that's proven to work, other than like make more NFTs and flog those as part of some future game that doesn't exist yet, is create content and then allow the thing to blossom from a very small space. I think that's probably why I have an issue with, these metaverse worlds, is they're massive and they expect people to build there and create experiences, but there is no experience.
Yeah. I think people probably mistook speculative interest for emotional connection, or maybe we're not as aware of the importance of that emotional connection. I think that's, Disney and you name the IP that has been built over many years. There's a deep feeling that people associate with, and also it's a traditionally very hard business to invest in because who knows what's going to win. And so you see these breakout projects or breakout characters, and we've seen the world of Disney buying and George Lucas selling for $4 billion, like these things having an immense amount of value and then being turned into more value. And so I think there's sort of that model. But I think what we've seen in a lot of this IP in the NFT space was this like speculative drive that drove a lot of hype that made people think that was actually meaningful IP. And I think I agree with your sentiment there. I think that's unlikely that is the case, definitely not sustainable. And so then the question is like, okay, what is? And I think the threads that you're pulling on are fascinating, right? It's about a space for co-creation. It's about narrative storytelling. It's about doing something new and novel. And also I think this idea of you and your team taking the most active role in pushing those edges forward and defining that content and realizing that work probably alongside everything else, but that work is absolutely essential probably over the next 5 or 10 years to really, fully bring this vision that you have into the world.
Well, yeah, there's a couple of things to unpack there. Firstly, this idea of co-creation, because it gets used a lot. Oh my goodness. We're going to co-create with our community. And honestly, it's fucking lazy. It's fucking lazy. It basically presumes that your community is going to step in and do the work that you can't do because it'll be fun for them to do it. And I don't believe any of that bullshit.
I am a tortured soul of a creator. Creating is not.
I just want to write the law, and then people are going to celebrate this law because I wrote it. It's like no. That's. I mean, so obviously, if I'm criticizing this idea of co-creation, what do I mean by it? There's an engine in what we do that is piling as much force and kinetic energy into the development of the IP and the exploration of the IP as we possibly can. But we're also building a bridge to, casual viewers that can come and enjoy the questions that we unearth. But what gets thrown up as the result of producing a video, which will become 2 videos, will become 5, 10 videos every week, is that we're building the law in real time. We are building things that become part of the law. We're not having to like imagine a thing and then that has to become a thing. And no, we make a video, we document it. Therefore, it becomes law in real time. Those pieces can then become a springboard for a community member to build something with. One of the most interesting things that has come out of our community is someone got pissed off with us because we weren't developing fast enough after 6 weeks from launch. We hadn't put in a bid to buy SpaceX at that point, so they were, understandably disappointed. But they said, you're not appealing to a Web3 audience, so what you should do is just build a giant dick and put a mutant ape inside. And we sat and we thought about this and went, you know what, that's actually not a bad idea. What if we did do that? So, because Dookie Dash from Bored Apes was coming out at the time and everyone thought it was a low-effort piece of junk. And it sort of wasn't. It was kind of clever. But so we built a giant dildo in a virtual land because it was funny, and it actually was, as a piece of satire, it was pretty entertaining. And then we tried to build the most devilish game we could around it, but that came from the community. So in that sense, that is community co-creation. We're not requiring our community to do all the hard work that we refuse to do ourselves. We're doing a lot of hard work and creating fertile ground in which these things can come up. But that Dildo Dash can happily exist in Trashland. I don't think you could put Dildo Dash in Artifacts IP. It just wouldn't sit there. And that kind of makes me happy because it's scrappy and weird, and more fertile for that stuff. So co-creation, if we want community members to come and be part of it, then at some point we will. But I don't think that's necessarily the way it works. They should feel free to just take any piece of what we've done and build off it, like Mr. Best. Like Mr. Best is the perfect example of community co-creation, because we made a thing and we just gave it out there and then they took it and ran with it. That's really important. There's another part to this, which is I've seen a lot of these 10K NFT projects default to my asset belongs to me, and I'm going to put that on a whiskey bottle. Or I'm going to put this on a ketchup, or or run a burger van. And I'm like, no, doesn't work. At least not for me anyway, because your business is fundamentally at the mercy of the health of the entire collection. That seems to me insane. Like, having spent all this time working in Web3 and crypto, you realize just how much everything you do is at the mercy of Bitcoin. Whether you like it or not, it's just what it is. So you cannot control Bitcoin. Therefore, you cannot control the fate of your own business. That's insanity. So what you do is you pray for the cycle to spin around again, to be able to give you enough exit liquidity if you need it, or enough fighting money to survive the next 4 years of pain. This is fucking insane. It's completely insane. So the same thing applies to NFT collections. It's even worse because it's still so early that nobody knows. And plus, like, you're fighting against 9,999 or whatever it is, other brand owners whose IP looks pretty much identical to yours. And for most people, they don't get it. They don't see the difference. It's an ape. It's not your ape. It's an ape. And like, yes, you can insert a little bit of IP, but there's no differentiation there. Like, the differentiation occurs in brands. A brand is a mark. It's a point of differentiation. And you can imbue all the storytelling power or the marketing power in that brand that you want. And therefore, it can exist. I'm just going to jump up and grab something from over there. Exhibit A. So this is a can of Fraz. This is an ad for the can of Fraz. This thing really exists. You know what? I should really go and get a can of Fraz. I'll get one in a second. So what we've done is we've built brands in our Trashland, because we felt that brands, if you could see like a beer brand or a clothing brand in a virtual world, it just makes it feel more real. It makes it feel more built out, because commercial activities make a world feel real. So we built these brands, and what we're going to do, this is completely insane. We're going to release a product, a drop for each of these brands, and then we're just going to release them as CC0 brands that a community can just go and do with what they want. Which is nuts. It's the absolute opposite thing that you're supposed to do. You're supposed to protect your IP. You're supposed to protect your marks, your brands, everything else. But by having fictitious brands that have a drop attached to it, which is going to be satirical and funny and weird and whatever. So we have Fraz. So this is a can of Fraz. There it is. There you go. So that has my character on it. It's very nice. It's beer flavored cola, or cola flavored beer. You decide. And it can have variations. So here is Fraz Primal. It's the original low effort energy drink. So what we've done with these proof of concepts is basically we've said, okay, here's a drink. Here's a variation of that drink. And the brand, the Fraz brand, go do with it what you want. And the great thing about the Fraz brand is it bears no relationship really to the pictures. So if the pictures tumble in value, or the fate of pictures in general gets fucked, the brand will continue. So there's some like defensibility there. So these rich pieces of IP, and we have a ton of them that we want to cook up, because Trashland is a rich world in which literally anything goes. But like, think of it like Mischief, right? So Mischief does 3 drops a month. They cook up these incredible products. It's an art collective, but they're really a machine when it comes to these drops, and they're highly desirable. That's where Fraz, DGAF, Headcrank, all these different brands we've cooked up, that's the world that we sit in. But those drops won't make any sense unless we have an audience for them, and that audience will come to us through content. So that's kind of like, you're talking about the business of it. That's one where we do it. They're like traditional YouTube route, brand integrations, this kind of thing. We can rent out the mocap studio to people for a day or whatever at a very high rate, because it's such a specialized piece of kit. We can get grants for development. We can build partnerships with companies that want to really explore really the far reaches of this community, this technology and where it's going. There's a bunch of different ways we can monetize it. But fundamentally, the most valuable thing that we will ever own is that IP, and holding the fate of that IP in our own hands, because we're the most capable content creators on that IP, and then filtering what we've made down to our community so that they can take pieces of it, broadens the footprint and allows them to take more risks and not have to do so much heavy lifting of their own. They can just take a piece of it, and they're building off what we've built. That's what we mean by co-creation, brands, everything else. It's building the possibilities to make actually a realistic contribution in co-creation. The other thing you said was storytelling. Man, that gets my goat. Storytelling. I always ask this of everyone that I go on a podcast with, like, define story for me. And I'm going to put you on the spot here, but like, I always find it interesting to see what people think of story, because nobody can give me a good answer.
Setting myself up for, I think you're setting the bar a little. I like it. Story is a narrative that builds a world that entertains and captivates and makes a person feel some kind of way so that they continue to pay attention to it.
Well, you told me what it does. But what is it? Breaking it down to first principles, like the atoms of story. What is it?
Words, characters, imagination, relevance to history or experience that can conjure new
It's hard,
ideas.
Right?
Yeah.
It's really hard. And like we use it, it's a word we use all the time because we know what it feels like. But actually describing it, my God, it's hard. And like everyone has a different interpretation of it. But unless you kind of write stories all the time, it's kind of hard to ring fence it and give it a place. But I'll give you my version of it, which I don't know whether it's right or wrong, but it works for me. It's really simple. It's 3 words: setup and payoff. So a setup, what? The payoff, how it felt. That's it. And if you think about it in that way, it's so simple, because all you're doing is saying, like, you know, a rich story, 90 minutes, it's comprised of multiple setups and payoffs. But the fundamental reason that you enjoy it is because a set of expectations was set up and you entered into a relationship with those set of expectations. And then something happened and it was paid off in a way you weren't expecting. And that's when stories are really good. They pay off the expectations in ways that you're not expecting. And you feel it and you feel satisfied by it. But I think asking that question of people really puts them on the spot, because everybody assumes that they know what it is. And nobody I have ever come across can genuinely properly articulate it simply. They just end up sort of adding words all over the place. And I think if you want to call yourself a storyteller, you need to know that. And it's the same thing if you want to work in the metaverse, you need to have a definition of the metaverse. So for me, it's the internet built by game developers. Again, keeping it simple, allowing it to be a thing that can act as a springboard, but doesn't necessarily tie it down to too many things. And then the thing that I think is the biggest kind of hit point on the metaverse as it stands at the moment is it's a shit experience. And then you have to ask yourself, well, what is an experience? Like if you say something is a shit experience, or, you know, it's a bad story, okay, define story. So for me, like honestly, the hardest work I've done on Based, I guess over the last 12 months, is to put myself in a position where I can answer those questions. Because it seems like it should be obvious, but it just isn't. And then, you know, for me, like experiences are, again, a thing that you know what it is, but defining it and breaking it down is really tough. So here's how I look at it. There's basically the sensations, which is I see something, I hear something, I taste it, I feel it. And then there's the emotions that evokes. And then there's the thoughts that come about as a result of those emotions. Those 3 things together basically form an experience. And so thinking about that, possibly one of the big reasons why the metaverse falls down as an experience is because like the first part of it, the sensations, is so poorly served by everything. Like you go in VR and like you can see things and you can move around and you don't feel anything. You don't smell anything. So you've got sight and hearing, but most other experiences, you really haven't got a huge amount of all of those things. So you're kind of getting 2 out of the 5 senses. No wonder it feels like a shabby experience. Like when we go on a roller coaster, we get all of that at the same time. You get the smell of like crappy hot dog onions mixed up with like, you know, all of these different things. And it's an incredible experience. So, you know, that's more of a simplified way of looking at it, but it's just because the metaverse in general right now delivers up so few sensations that it's not surprising that the emotional and mental faculties are so poorly served by it. At least that's my feeling on it. So I guess with when I talk about the holodeck in there, one of my kind of big missions at the moment is to make it, yes, interactive, but also make it tactile. So I can actually feel stuff in the volume and I can interact with characters in real time. And like if a car crashes into me, it will knock me forward. That's next level. Being able to see all around the volume as well, that's a big thing. But like it's all iterations of this. And then of course we'll stream the whole thing and you'll be able to emote bananas and the bananas will land on my head and I'll hurt myself. You know, that's where we want to get to with it.
So what I really wanted to get out of this conversation was just sort of like a nuanced understanding of a term that I think falls into the same characteristics as storytelling or as experience, and that people just sort of rarely explore the details or what we truly mean by those things. And I think so much of the space, this Web3 space, is really narrative driven, and it's very easy to engage with a lot of ideas as narratives. And I think for us to get to that more stable ground, the next iterations of these deep exploration of what we actually mean and where there is within these concepts, I think is important. And so I think this conversation has been wonderful at doing that. I love the fact that in my mind right now, the metaverse exists in your office, which is in a little corner of a building somewhere, which is in the corner of a town somewhere. And this idea of small little iterative experiences being built in this new way, almost like building from foundations up rather than from this sort of like loose idea, I think feels very good to me.
I think that's it. I would imagine though the people that have built these massive worlds with all the land figured that each parcel was its own kind of mini experience, and people would start to kind of explore and figure out what it is that their corner of the world was. But I guess one of the other issues with the metaverse as it is at the moment is it's very heavy on skeuomorphism. You know, it's like just transplant stuff from the real world into digital worlds and make it stick. I'm trying to listen to the thing that doesn't work for me and trying to understand why it doesn't work. And it's the same with like 10K PFP projects. Like, why does certain things not work, and how would we instinctively go a different way about it? And it's not like I have all the answers, because I really don't. But if the metaverse is about an experience, you've got to understand what the experience is. Dan Olsen has, bless him, has made another film where he tears Decentraland a new one, and he doesn't at any point articulate that, which I think is a shame, because he makes a lot of very good points, particularly about governance, particularly about how crap the game is. I think it's unfair to rip an emergent platform so heavy a new one, except that, no, he's right, because the marketing, the hype and everything else led us to believe X, and a bunch of people who don't really understand these things thought it was X, and are sort of perpetuating this myth that it is this amazing thing. But, you know, like, as we know, the first to do things generally doesn't work out. Like, for every Facebook, there's a MySpace. So it's not Decentraland's fault in any way. But I think for all that Dan made a lot of interesting points, he didn't land on the thing. The most important thing of all is, if it's supposed to deliver experience, what is experience? And how would a metaverse get there? Because if we can't understand that, then there is no hope. So if I'm going to steel man his film, which you asked me to do, it was to do that. Because I went through his entire script and I looked at everything he'd said. And yes, his tone is a bit hard to endure from time to time. And he's playing to his crowd. But there was a lot that was correct there. The rent-seeking model of those worlds, the inane kind of people that end up calling it home and saying this is wonderful, who don't really know what they're doing. I mean, that's basically just the internet reflected. But the thing that kept coming back and wasn't articulated, which I think he missed, was this idea of defining an experience. And if we don't understand what the experience is, then we shouldn't build a massive world, because there's no point. We need to go back and understand experience first. So that's what I'm trying to do in there. I'm just trying to create a laboratory to build that holodeck-like experience. You know, the ironic thing is, in that film, about 10 minutes in, Dan Olsen actually says, we've had holodecks in Star Trek and they haven't built them yet, but God, I wish they would. I messaged him on Twitter today and I said, because he insults me quite a lot in the film, I said, if you can get past the insults, I've actually started building a holodeck and I would love to show you around one day. Because I have no interest in getting into a petty fight with the guy. But I also would like to explain to him and show him in real time what it is that I'm actually doing, so he can get past his petty grievance and actually engage in a conversation with me. So Dan, if you're listening, which I know you're not, I'm here. I'm not angry. I welcome you. I steel man you. So come talk if you have the balls.
It's always easy to comment. It's much harder to go build SuperMassive, BasedAF, the based world, garbage land, I think these are all words you're going to hear a lot more about.
It's trash land and it's the Trashverse. Even just calling it the Trashverse seems just like, oh yeah, you've just jumped to being Marvel. It's like, no, it's just a collection of things that connect to that world. And it's sort of easy to call it that.
How insulting. Yeah. Trashland is far more appropriate. I love it.
Yeah.
Really appreciate you hanging out with us today. And I think it's very clear that anybody listening to this episode is going to walk away with a different view, I think, on a word that is being or has been thrown out many times and pumped into oblivion many more times. And yet I think there's a real thing here that's worth paying attention to. And BasedAF, SuperMassive, the IP, the media, the stories, the technology, I think there's a lot to follow along with. So yeah, appreciate you hanging out with us today, man.
If I leave it at one point, there's the marketing version of so many words now, and then there's the actual truth. And it gets really hard to kind of distance one from another. Like the metaverse hype, yes, totally. Blockchain, crypto hype, yes, totally garbage. NFT hype, totally garbage. But underneath all of them, there is something that fundamentally makes sense. If you saw Jay-Z's, the mixtape around Jay-Z that was the fake, like, how do you verify authenticity? That is a job that blockchain is designed to do. But yeah, we're just going to throw it in the bin because we hate crypto bros. You know, it's exhausting. But at some point, the penny will drop.
It's the game we play, man.
When it becomes,
it's the game we play. You know, and I think it's one that maybe feels like a sort of a unique thing in the worlds that you and I live in, but I think are actually going to become far more common to far more people. So I'm having fun. You're having fun. Let's go.
I'm trying. I know it got really serious here. Like, I'm normally not that serious. It's just like these things have been on my mind because I have to defend myself. I have to,
yeah, I get it.
You're pitching to people who have money who've been burned by a market, and you have to have a very clear position and an idea of why what you do is defendable.
It's as much a narrative game as anything else, right? Like, this is what investing is, and what's it's sort of betting on the future. The future is these narratives, and there's sort of a safety in the AAA version of that narrative, right? It's like, why are we doing tentpole strategy? Why is it more every new movie a Marvel movie or a Star Wars movie? It's because it's safe there, and yet really the business that most investors are in are trying to find the outliers, and it's just such a weird thing to get looped into. And so if you're out of narrative, then it should truly be easier to raise in many ways if we're looking for asymmetric returns, and yet it's more difficult. And that's a big part of why I think I'm so excited to do what we're doing at Seed Club. Is I have this sort of opportunity to be a part of a community and a network and a bunch of backers who are saying, yeah, cool, go. Yeah, I know everybody's looking over here now, but it's worthwhile looking over there. I think that's what you're doing as well.
Hello, friends. Steph here, Media Team Steward at Seed Club. If you like this episode, please subscribe, rate, and review Building at the Edges. This helps other Web3 builders discover these valuable insights. And tell us what you think on Twitter. Tag us at SeedClubHQ. Thanks for listening. See you on the internet.